Hello and welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Allenwyma. Today I'm with Chris Gibb. Every time I want to say Chris Gibbs for some weird reason, I'm not sure why, but Chris Gibb. He is the author of a very interesting and could be quite useful for myself at least. I'm sure useful for other people. That's why you're creating it. SDK called Hydro SDK, which the main feature of it that I could see is that you can do code push. So everybody knows that with Flutter, when you compile your app, that's it. There's no way to dynamically update it once it's been released. And with this, it seems to be that you can actually code push, which is actually one of the better things about React Native and some other solutions out there. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. So my name's Chris. This voice is Chris for audio listeners. So I guess I've been doing this Hydro thing for quite long enough that people like Alan want to talk to me. It's kind of surreal to kind of be to this point in terms of well-knownness, I guess. The core idea and the driving force behind the project really is just lowering the barrier to entry for users of Flutter. Flutter is fantastic as an API surface. Looking at comparing it to the web, comparing it to CSS in particular, I feel that the primitives that Flutter gives you, the composability of the widget system is far nicer abstraction to work against. Development experience obviously has set the standard in terms of what a good client-side development experience looks like. Hot reload, etc., things of that nature. However, Flutter is still very much married to the platform packaging and distribution models for the platforms that it supports. So in particular, I'm very focused on Android and iOS and mobile in general. And we all know, I imagine if you're a listener to Flying High with Flutter or really any other Flutter podcast, you probably have shipped an app. You understand the pain that is involved in not only shipping a mobile release, but also operating it. And then, particularly operating at scale becomes an issue with observability and analytics and things of that nature. So the idea behind Hydro is to lower barrier to entry. And I hope to do that in two ways. So the first and the primary driver is language. So, as much as I just sung Flutter's praises, I feel that at least to the individuals and the groups that I speak to personally, Dart is an impediment to adoption purely for human reasons. Technical problems are easy and human people's are the hard ones. So if you imagine you are a organization of arbitrary size and you have some number of developers who are familiar with JavaScript and might be familiar with the web, the value proposition of something like React Native over Flutter is probably more interesting to you due solely to the previous experience of your developers. They can take their JavaScript knowledge, they can take their React knowledge and leverage it to then ship mobile experiences with React Native, whereas Dart is an immediate barrier to that, to getting to Flutter. So the first way I aim to really try to lower that barrier to entry is through language. So if I can present at least a programming language that is familiar to individuals outside the Flutter ecosystem, so in this case, initially, at least a TypeScript, even if the API surface and the programming model exposed by Flutter is unfamiliar, the language at least is familiar. So there's one reason not to come to Flutter, that's kind of removed from that calculus. The second area, which has seen far less investment from myself personally in Hydro outside of an MVP that shipped last summer, is code push. So talking about how the pain involved in deploying a mobile experience and then operating it. I hope to lower that barrier and to make that easier through code push, but my primary focus is on language.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like most people, when I talk to them about Flutter, they seem to be happy that it's not JavaScript. And TypeScript is kind of a weird language where it's like you get a mixture, and I don't really know what to think. It's either people love it or people hate it. But I think the general consensus is that it's better than plain JavaScript because you have the types?
Yeah, there's a bit of a religious war. I recognize that. A bit of a religious question to talk about in quite a lot of communities. But everyone has their own biases. Like personally, like my bias, like I first started programming with like C++98. Like I self-taught C++98 when I was relatively young. So my bias has always been toward strict typing. If you can't explain this to the compiler, then you're wrong as a programmer. That's kind of always been my bias. So when I speak to people that are very, very bought into the kind of idiomatic dynamic language way of doing things, whether that be JavaScript or Python or Ruby or what have you, I just don't emphasize with that experience. That's my own bias, though.
Yeah, I don't know. But why not just stick with, React Native and these other tools if it seems like an easier entry to bury? And why try to create this Hydro SDK to solve this issue?
Personally, I think Flutter, from a technical standpoint, does everything right, up to and including Dart. I think everything is fantastic. I mean, there's rough edges, as with anything. Nothing is 100% perfect. But if you consider that Flutter is more than a UI toolkit, right? Flutter is a UI toolkit at its most kind of the pointy end of the iceberg, if you will. That's the surface area that developers interact with. But Flutter is not only a UI toolkit, it is a rendering abstraction, it is a input abstraction, it is a windowing abstraction, it is a build system abstraction, it is a packaging abstraction, right? There's a gigantic amount of stuff that Flutter, I know I'm kind of biased toward audio, but I'm waving my hands here. There's a gigantic amount of stuff that Flutter, the application development, SDK, Flutter, the software development kit, does for you. That is absolutely fantastic, I believe. However, again, considering I'm interested in the human problem here, and the human problem is that unfortunately Dart is an impediment to adoption for quite a lot of folks.
That's really interesting. In my own, I don't have solid numbers, but in my own kind of seeing, I feel like there's more people who just wrap their mind around Dart better. And I'm talking about newcomers, right? Because it's JavaScript. Have you seen the Wetman before?
Yes. Yeah, and my understanding is that the Dart team has run user experience studies in the past where they have said, don't quote me on this. This is kind of like a fifth hand quote at this point. My understanding is they've ran studies where participants weren't told what they were writing in, and it never occurred to them that it was something called Dart. Like it's so familiar. It's designed to be as familiar as possible. I kind of liken it, if someone had to ask me to explain Dart, I would say it's Java with nullable primitives and null safety. Like basically, it's nominally typed. There's no reflection, I suppose, if you were to compare to Java, but the Cole's notes in my mind is it's Java with nullable primitives and null safety and no reflection. It's pretty familiar.
Yeah, the interesting part about that is that I think this comes from the history of I always forget his first name, but Casper Lund and his partner who actually created. So they worked on V8, and before that they were working on Hotspot with Java, right? So I think that a lot of the ideas came from Java. They're working on Hotspot for like a while. I'm pretty sure over 5 years, maybe even 10 years, they're working on this stuff, right? So if you're working in the same language for years, I don't think this is. I don't know when other languages popped up on a JVM, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if there wasn't any other JVM language at the time when they're working with Hotspot. But I think that's what really influenced them, because like I said, if you're working with the same language all the time, then it's like, why would you use something else? And the fact that Java is pretty much taught in every single school, and it is also part of Android, right? So there's a lot of that. Yeah. I think that kind of pushed them to make Dart like that. So I think that's part of the reason. But I think, yeah, like you said, there's a lot of intuitiveness to it, but there's also a lot of weirdness to it, like the implements, where you can say implements another class, but you don't actually implement anything, if I remember correctly. Like if I'm making a mock class, I could just write implements, and then you can, there's no object inheritance, right, as far as I could see. No, sorry, there is. What was it I'm thinking about that there's nothing of? There's no interface. That's what I'm on to say. There's no interface necessarily. Like you could say you can make an interface. Unless I missed something. I tried looking for interfaces, but I couldn't find anything. You can only say implements and another name of another class. Yeah, in Dart. Am I wrong or?
Yeah, I mean every class has an implicit interface, right? So when you implement a class, you describe, hey, this class I'm writing implements this interface. So every class has an implicit interface. Mixins have implicit interfaces, so they do exist. I'm not sure what you're.
Well, I mean, there's no way for you to say, okay, this is just an interface, and you have to implement this interface, and then you can program that this thing takes this interface. That's what I mean. Like when I was just, if you say it like that, okay, fine, then you can say it like that. But to me, an interface really means that I can actually create a file with just an interface in it, implement the interface, and then I can also say that, okay, these functions will take this interface, which is not actually a class. Like observable or these kind of bubbles, yeah. That's what I'm trying to say. You made me feel like I was like missing something. Like I feel like I missed like what really there is interfaces. How come I can never find it?
No, sorry. Yeah, it's implicit. Yeah, so that's a little bit clunky to try to be explicit with it. Yeah, I see where you're going with that. I personally I like to if I intend a class main interface, I'll just say abstract class blah blah blah. I'll give it some fields, but then you have to have a constructor for those fields because Dart doesn't understand it's an interface and it's always possible someone might extend you. So you have to provide a concrete constructor if you have fields, particularly final fields in that class. I mean, you could get away with getters. You could describe a whole bunch of getters and then just hope that your subclasses make those fields. It is a little bit clunky, but it's there.
Okay, I never really thought about that part, but that would make some sense. But yeah, I did wish that there was interfaces, but I'm also okay with what we have right now. I mean, I never really said, oh, I wish I had like an interface or something. I've never really thought about something like that. To me, it's like I always just use the thing that they asked for. I said I really want to extend that and make something special. But the other thing that's really interesting and kind of weird too about Dart is like they do have this thing called extensions, which to me feels like Ruby, and I worry that people will start extending and creating super crazy things where like you've played with Ruby before, right?
No, I've played with Ruby in anger. I have never sat down and been like, yes, I would like to write some Ruby.
Okay. Well, I mean, the big thing that people really dislike about Ruby is that they call it like opening a class and then like you could just do anything you want because you could just override methods that are already there and then you don't know what's going on. And the crazy part is that when you do that, you could just so they're called gems, the name of the libraries. So if you gem install something and that gets loaded up, that could totally rewrite a class to do something that is totally unexpected. And you don't know where it's coming from. But usually you don't have this issue.
I think Dart did extensions exactly right. Like I don't think they suffer from any of the issues you're describing. I remember when extensions first shipped in Dart, I was having a discussion with a coworker who started using them all over the place, like right after they shipped to stable, stable in Flutter at least, when that version of the Dart SDK rolled into stable Flutter. I remember talking about it, and one of my team members pulled up some extensions, and I was reviewing their code, and I was like, "You need to get rid of this. Like, this smells like MooTools to me, like from JavaScript back in the day. This smells like MooTools. This smells like ridiculous monkey patching from like AngularJS 1. This just smells bad to me. Please stop. I don't want extensions in this product." Now, after a couple years later, and like personally, like I use extensions all the time because like I've come to understand that extensions not only do they not have a runtime impact, they basically don't have a runtime impact on like the shape of the class. They basically don't have a compile time impact on the shape of the class either. They're just syntactic sugar for statics, right? When you describe if you describe an extension on string that's like, I don't know, like pad write, let's say just for argument's sake, if you have extension pad write on string and you have a method called pad write, all that is a static method that takes as its first parameter a string, and then there's your method. So when you're writing that code, it looks like a method call, right, where the receiver is a string and you call pad write. However, if that extension isn't in scope, if it's not public in the public or in the because it could be library private. But if it's not in the scope of where you're calling it, it's compile time error, right? And that's because, again, it's just a static method. It has the syntactical sugar to look like a regular method, but it's not. They also don't participate in like type resolution in any way. So if you have an interface that says like, this, you've had an interface that's like I pad writable, and you have a pad write method, and then you try to pass a string to it using your pad write extension, that won't compile because it's a static method. In reality, it's not an instance method. You're not actually modifying the class in any way.
But at the same time, you also think that Dart is a problem for people. It's an impedance. I feel like
it's
you
a
love
human
it so
problem.
much.
It is not a technical problem. Dart is a beautiful language. Like I've written Dart every single day for like 3 or so years now. I think it's a beautiful language. With Hydro is about human problems. It's not about technical problems. I talk trash about Dart on Twitter because I love it.
Yeah, it's like a love-hate relationship.
Less hate than love. I think, like I said, I write Dart every day. I kind of see the rough edges, and it's fun to talk about on Twitter. But it's a beautiful language.
Speaking of that, what are you actually doing with as your daily job?
Yeah. So right now, Hydro is not my. I don't make any income from Hydro. I do have a 9 to 5. So right now I work for a company called Varicent. I'm a front-end engineer for Varicent.
You're doing Dart for front end?
No, so we're doing TypeScript. I'm doing TypeScript and React in this role.
Okay, so you still have, so you never really want, I mean, you can use Dart, right? And then just transpile it over to JavaScript. You never thought about doing that?
I came onto this team, so I've come onto the growth products division of this particular team I'm on is in the growth products division. So they were relatively well established before me. They had, I don't know, they had quite a lot of TypeScript before me. So there's no reason to look for a rewrite or a refactor or an addition even in Dart.
You never thought to ask people to take a look at Dart and figure and try using it? Because I don't know, I'd rather write in Dart and export JavaScript than write JavaScript directly.
Yeah, I mean, like personally, I feel the same way. Like I've spent quite a few years, like before I even knew Flutter existed, writing TypeScript every day for money. So I was pretty bought into the whole, structural typing is fantastic and everyone else is wrong, and the web is everything and the web is the future. Like I believed that for quite a long time. I was very bought into those ideas, but I feel like I've kind of come full circle in the sense that I feel like a nominal, and particularly a nominal reified type system like Dart is like, 1,000 times better than something like TypeScript, which, is structural, it's erased. I feel like Dart is 1,000 times better in terms of developer productivity and ergonomics. Even without hot reload, even if Dart did not have hot reload with Flutter, I still feel like type system is way more productive than TypeScript. So for those reasons, I feel like it's a good sell, but in general, like I said, it's human problems, right? So, people have JavaScript backgrounds. The jump to TypeScript isn't that big. And likewise, once you start to build code, quite a lot of code organizationally, you build expertise, you build just a volume of code, a corpus of code that's already in TypeScript. Trying to introduce new language is a non-starter. I would say in general, and wait for audio listeners, I'm waving my hands again. I'm saying in general, that's a non-starter.
Yeah. So for everybody who's just listening to audio, we had a discussion about, I asked Chris if he was planning to demo something, and he didn't even think about that because we never really talked about it. I just thought, this would be a great opportunity to actually see how this thing works in person. And I think you completely forgot that there actually is a video part to this. So yes. That's okay. It's fine. Don't worry about it. I mean,
I'd love to come back. Maybe if you don't hate me by the end of this, I'd love to come back. We can do some demos for you. But yeah, in terms of the audio side, I can talk about this thing all day, up and down the stack, whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, no, I'm totally fine with you coming back even as soon as you like. As you can see, we were also talking about like which episodes that he liked. He liked the one with Matt Curl on here, and Matt Curl came on twice. I also really interested in what Matt Curl has to say. He's got different opinions, but also his background in Flutter, being on the Flutter team, also gives some interesting feedback. Like as much as I love Flutter and Dart, I sadly It's really weird. Like my career is kind of like a roller coaster where it's like sometimes I'm working on Flutter only, and then sometimes I'm working on like Elixir only, and I just keep going back and forth between the two. So recently I'm doing Elixir only, um, and I have somebody on my team who's doing all the Flutter work for right now. So I'm just kind of providing guidance at the moment, and using this podcast to kind of stay in tune with what's going on in the community. If I don't, then I really have no idea what's going on.
Fair enough.
What I wanted to say, actually, so a couple of things that triggered a couple of thoughts in my mind is hot code reload within Dart. The weird part about that with Dart is that it's not actually straightforward. Like recently, I was taking a look at, so we have a Python service for a client of ours that generates PDFs. And I talked to Matt Carroll, and he was thinking that, he told me that I should take a look at the PDF library within Dart. And that's something I'm seriously taking a look at. Like
I've heard a lot of good things about it. I've heard tons of good things about it. I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
So if you're using Flutter to make your apps, the PDF library is really similar, very similar. And so I originally thinking about using Rust for it because the thing is, like, it takes like, I don't know, 7 to 10 seconds or so to create one PDF right now. And I think it's because of the massive amount of serialization going between C and Python or something like that. And so I was thinking about rewriting it with Rust, and then Matt Carroll said, why don't I take a look at the PDF library in Dart? And I just played for a few minutes with it, and I was like, actually, this is super simple. And what I like about it is that it's very visual, I would say. Because like when you look at Flutter, right, you can look at the code and you can imagine what it looks like, and it's going to be pretty close.
Yeah.
Right? The same thing with the PDF library. Like you can say, okay, this, because you can say center, and it actually centers it in the middle of the page in PDF. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Like, I don't know, every single time. Like, I think I've done the most amount of PDF work is probably with WebKit HTML PDF. That was pretty straightforward. So if you make an HTML page, you can stick it to this binary and it pulls out a PDF for you. So I was thinking about doing something like that. But yeah, anyways, in the end, like I'm thinking about doing that because basically anything is faster than this Python implementation that we have right now. That's my opinion, at least for the moment. And yeah, so so the reason that I'm talking about this is because I wanted to try to develop using Shelf because we have an HTTP interface, because we have a bunch of microservices, right? So we have most of it's in Elixir, and because of high scalability, because we're planning on having a lot of people connecting to the APIs. The PDF generation, I think, within Elixir is not very mature, not very nice. I really didn't look too much solid at it yet, but anyways, whenever I found something that's bothered, I could take a look to see what we can do with it. And like I said, looking at Rust because that's something else we're playing around with these days. But then, like I said, the PDF one, I forgot where I could go. Okay, so anyways, so I started playing around with it. I feel like I'm going on a way tangent. Sorry about that. So, all right, back on topic. Here's where we are. The way a Dart project works is that you can say Dart run, and that's just going to run it and not really compile it. And so it's still running on a VM as far as I understand. You're squinting like I'm saying something wrong. Am I saying something wrong, or is this early for you?
I think you're on track.
Okay. So what I understand is if you say Dart run, it's not going to compile it. When you say like Dart compile the exe, it's not going to compile it to a native binary. But what I found was that when I saved the files and tried to rerun execution of an endpoint, it didn't change anything. I had to actually Control C and then restart it, which I was a little bit surprised. And doing some researching, Dart itself, like, it's not built in, like, it's not straightforward how you actually do the hot code reloading. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
So you actually have to start it with a --VM something, some kind of --VM argument. And then I think you still have to do some more configuration to actually like tell it to reload code. But Flutter does all the stuff for you like behind the scenes. So you really don't know this part. Yeah. So Dart has this capability, but the problem is that there's actually some ceremony to make it actually happen. So on pub.dev, you're going to find a bunch of libraries that actually do the hot code reloading. And there is some ceremony to those because it's like, well, what do you want to do? Like, do you want to reload these isolates or not? And there's like some things that you need to also do too.
Yeah, it's not clear to me. I mean, I think you've dug in this a little bit more than I have. It sounds like it's not clear to me where that boundary is in terms of like, where's that interface to get hot reload working in Dart. My understanding is that a lot of it is within the Dart VM, but in terms of that interface, right? Like, how do you do you connect to the like VM debugger protocol? Like, do you like is the external tool responsible for pushing updated like function bodies into the VM? Who's watching files? Who is connecting to the protocol and pushing function bodies? Is it the Flutter debug protocol that's pushing function bodies over that pipe and then into the running VM on the device? Like where does that happen? Who is responsible for that? I have no idea. So in terms of like Dart run, like I don't know where that interface is at all. I know Flutter does it obviously, but from a vanilla Dart project, I have absolutely no idea.
That's why I wish. So what I understand now, and I think I talked to this with somebody from Google, I can't remember now. Dart is basically glued himself to Flutter, and you can argue it two ways, right? You can say that's good, or you can say that's bad, because now every time there's a new Dart release, or vice versa with Flutter, they're both going to get a release, and it's kind of good because you need to have what I call like the Rails effect. Well, I literally just made it up right now, by the way. So whatever you want to call it, right? Like with Ruby never really became popular, in my opinion, until Rails came out. And because of Rails, that's what's been pushing Ruby along for the most part. That's my understanding. And you can say I'm wrong. You can say I'm not wrong. It's whatever. That's the way I see it. That without Rails, Ruby would not be as popular as it is today. Not saying that you can't use Ruby without it. I mean, you have Chef, you have Puppet. These things are actually built in Ruby, not built in Rails, or built in Ruby, right? But anyways, Dart, I think, is in the same situation, right? They tried for a long time Angular Dart and all these other things. Didn't really work out. Flutter is what's keeping Dart around. And I think the sad part is that for Dart really to survive, for Dart really to survive past Flutter, I think you're going to have to decouple a bit and make the language just a little bit more independent, right? You can still install Dart by itself, but like there's a lot of things that Flutter extends onto Dart, like this automatic, like as soon as I save the file, it's automatically going to be reloaded. Why can't we have this when we just run Dart run automatically? I can't see a good reason why I wouldn't want to do that. I think it should be you run Dart run, everything gets reloaded as soon as you save the file. Maybe we need to figure out like what kind of seance you need to make to, you know what I mean? But it should be like, there should be some kind of standard that you have hot code reloading, and then you just have to configure it from there. That's my opinion. I don't know what you think, but that's what I think would really help.
I think hot code reload is only relevant for long running, like persistent applications during development time. So consider, you're debugging your mobile app. Well, it's going to be running while you debug it. So hot reload is obviously like magic in terms of productivity in that experience. Likewise, like to your experience with Shelf, I've never used Shelf, but I understand Shelf is a server framework for Dart. I think that's also a fantastic use case, right? You're going to spin up your server, you're going to hit endpoints, you're going to whatever with it. It's going to be running while you're iterating on it. Like that's another like perfect use case in my mind for hot code reload. Where I think it falls down is in like CLIs. If you're writing, Dart CLIs that you call it and does some stuff and maybe it writes a file, right? That's it's kind of not useful in that case. But for the two cases that we've just talked about, mobile and server frameworks, I think it's perfect. And I agree with you that providing some very clear guidance on like Dart run, maybe it's like Dart run -- whatever. Like there you go. Now, I mean, that being said, there's some more complexity that would have to happen there in terms of file watching and things of that nature, because Flutter is, I don't fully understand the file watching implementation in Flutter, but it's magic as far as I can tell. And working on Flutter, working inside of Flutter mono repositories with upwards of 500,000 lines of code, you touch one file that's somewhere deep in your dependency graph, and like it just kind of works. Like everything just kind of works pretty, not quite instantaneously, but at that scale. But it works without configuration. It works without like crashing. You don't run out of file. You don't ever like. I personally have never like ran out of file descriptors on Mac. Like just trying to Flutter run. Like it just kind of works without ceremony and like without gotchas in my mind, except for the ones that are documented, and those are reasonable in my mind. So yeah, how do you bring that experience to Dart? I don't know. but I agree that they should.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just not clear. Like I did see that. I think they recently, within the end of last year, I was just kind of doing some checking recently because I'm interested. Like I said, I have never done Shelf until recently. Started looking at it, and actually the other thing too is that like there is this library called ServerPod. Have you seen that before? So ServerPod is
I've seen it on Twitter, but I've never looked into it.
Sorry to push you to answer while you're drinking your cup. I was trying to cover for you for a second.
It's all good.
Yeah, so ServerPod, I talked to it. So Victor, I talked to Victor recently, and I asked him if he's using Shelf, and I tried looking through it, and it's not. And that's because Dart.io already has a perfect web implementation built into the framework, right? So there's no real need to actually use Shelf, but you can. I think it provides some niceties on top. But like, okay, well, what do you want Dart to be? Like, if besides Flutter, right? What else do you want Dart to be? Is it that is it that like the main focus of Dart is back to where it used to be, which was a way to make like kind of like a better JavaScripty kind of experience? Or do you want to stick to CLIs like we have with Sassy CSS? Or, you know, what, like you need to have some kind of focus, right? And I think that we should be taking a look at long running processes. Why not? You know, and if it's short, like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's something there, and let's not make them so coupled, right? Because if Flutter ever gets dropped for whatever reason someday, yeah, I mean that I don't think it will be, but you know, let's try to expand it. I think it could be more interesting for the community itself.
Yeah, I mean, I struggle to reply intelligently to that line of thinking, honestly, because I don't understand what kind of cost benefit or any kind of like trade-off analysis that Google does to determine where to invest, whether into Flutter or into Dart, decoupled from Flutter. I don't understand any of that process. So, you know, I struggle to have an opinion either way. As someone who writes Dart every day and, you know, enjoys it quite a lot, I would love to see it be more popular just in general. Like for that reason, I bought into this idea. But in terms of like, you know, where should Google put their time and energy and money? I have no idea. No idea what's best.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't really know what's important for them, but I think that, how do I say this? Based on what I've seen Google doing, which is like, okay, we're not going to be pushing out, like I think they made an announcement that they're not going to be pushing out their Angular Dart updates. Doesn't mean they're not using it. They're just not going to focus on like the community more because it's just not growing.
Yeah.
Or it could be getting smaller. I don't know. And
yeah, I'm not sure.
Really sticking out there.
I'm not sure about their growth, like their open source growth numbers in terms of their users, but I can imagine, again, from a cost benefit analysis, I can imagine that, you know, change management of their internal customers for Angular Dart in Google 3 and within their mono repository is way cheaper and easier in terms of their time and effort than it is to roll out a breaking change or any change really into the open source users. So purely from that perspective, regardless of their adoption, like I can understand that. I can understand that a lot.
Yeah, but now we're doing enough on a tangent. We came here to talk about Hydro SDK. So I should really bring us back. Okay, how does this thing actually work? Like you said that you can go into deep technical thought. Like how do they actually talk to each other, right? Because Dart is compiling to native code. You said there's no bridge, but we're using TypeScript and there's NPM. So like to me, it's like two different things. So what's going on?
Yeah, so the secret sauce is it is written in Dart all the way down. I'm waving my hands again for audio listeners. There's a big asterisk there when I say Dart all the way down, but generally speaking, it is Dart all the way down. So there's no native bridge, right? So if you consider the execution model of something like React Native, not to punch them too much, but no disrespect, but you consider the execution model. You have a bunch of JavaScript. It is executing in some environment that is fully separate in terms of memory model, in terms of execution context from the UI that you're actually orchestrating, and that communication is done over a bridge. So I understand the React Native folks are rolling out some kind of new architecture, but regardless, like that's a pretty big technical barrier. That kind of transition from JavaScript into native UI components that you're orchestrating. I like to describe the architecture of Hydro SDK as highly similar to React Native with something like Hermes. So what that, if you're unfamiliar, what that means to me at least is in terms of the developer experience, you're writing TypeScript code, or you're sitting down, you're writing out your TypeScript. The classes that you're interacting with are familiar from a Flutter standpoint. It's the same, not quite the same. It is 99% the same as Flutter. There's a bunch of stuff missing, to be fair, and that's why I don't recommend Hydro. One of the reasons why I don't recommend it for production use, I can't make any stability guarantees, and there's quite a lot of missing functionality in terms of what you would expect from Flutter, just purely in terms of widgets that are missing. Not to mention, if you want to write your own render object with Hydro, you just can't, because the render object classes don't exist in Hydro yet. That is, they will soon. And if you follow any of the in progress branches on GitHub, you might see them there, but they are not on the default branch, and they're not in a release yet. So this is happening. But anyway, developer experience, right? You're writing TypeScript, you're interacting with an API service that you're familiar with from Flutter. Now, when you save those files, there is a build system that is built into Hydro. So that build system is wired up into the hydroc run command. So if you sit down and you run your npx hydroc run to spin up it will start running your Hydro content. That build system will figure out what files you've touched in terms of your TypeScript code, and it will lower those into Lua. So I'm using a fantastic third-party package called TypeScript to Lua. It's a very descriptive name. So that package lets you take TypeScript code and spit out Lua. Now, that is as opposed to spitting out JavaScript, which is obviously what you'd expect. So your TypeScript code is lowered into Lua, and that Lua is then bundled. So if anyone is familiar with the dark days before Webpack, if you're familiar with Browserify or Rollup, or Webpack itself, you could say is dark. But anyway, the similar bundle models from Browserify or Rollup or anything from the older front-end web ecosystem. It's the same idea. So you put out your Lua, you bundle it together, and then finally there's a compilation step that takes your Lua bundle produced from your TypeScript, and it compiles that into bytecode. That bytecode is then packaged, and then it is pushed up into your running Flutter app. So you would take, so Hydro SDK also has a Dart portion. So within your Flutter app, you would say you would import Hydro SDK, and you would say run component, and you would say this is the project I would like to reference, and this is the component I'd like to reference, and that's how code in Hydro is organized in terms of projects and components. So at runtime, this run component widget figures out, first of all, what mode it's running in. So if you're in debug mode, if you're debugging your Flutter app on your computer, it will attempt to talk to the Hydro build system, and it will attempt to talk to some special systems going on there that will let it reload code. So not quite as powerful as Dart's hot reload. There are a couple of more limitations than in Dart, but when you're running in debug mode, this run component widget communicates with the build system, and it will let you hot reload your TypeScript code. When you're running in release mode, so when you've built your app for release and you're going to deploy it somewhere, all of that hot reload stuff is turned off, and all of that service discovery in terms of the development experience is turned off as well. I guess I haven't explained how that works at runtime.
Yeah, I understand about the Dart part. It's very clear, but I'm just trying to think about, okay, so you write TypeScript, it gets compiled down to Lua. That means there has to be some type of Lua interpreter that's running on the device, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
So
there's wrap my mind around all the stuff. There's a lot of pieces, right?
Yeah.
Because and then you're like, and then we even more confused when you're like, okay, it start from top to bottom. Well, wait, slow down. There's a lot of pieces involved. Okay, so let me try to reiterate back what I understand, and let me know if there's something I'm wrong or where I'm missing something. All right, so you're using npm to deliver in Node to deliver like the Lua piece, which helps with like code pushing and things like that. So okay, if I got something wrong, you're squinting a bit. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, that's you're like 90%. Yeah, so and I use npm to kind of bootstrap the whole experience. So
Okay.
If you install Hydro SDK with npm and you just start to say like, hydroc run, npm pulls in all of the dependencies. So Hydro SDK has a set of what I call SDK tools. So that's the Lua compiler.
Mm.
That's the
Okay.
compiler that compiles Lua to bytecode. That is the compiler that compiles your TypeScript into Lua and bundles it. There's some other things there to serve it. So I talked about service discovery from your debug app. There's a whole bunch of command line tools, and npm figures out all of that. Well, what I've written for npm figures out all of that, and it just installs it on your machine. It figures out, you're running Windows 64-bit. Let's pull all the 64-bit Windows stuff and let's figure that out. So that's all kind of like, you don't have to think about it. It just kind of works. So that's from npm. I also use npm to distribute source code.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you like import, material app and you want to use that in your TypeScript, like that code also comes from npm.
All right. So the tools, okay. But how come you don't just use like, because Dart has this like activate, right? Where you can activate some kind of package globally. Why can't you do something like that? Since you said you're writing a lot of the stuff in Dart now.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sold on the distribution model of everything I just described. The primary reason is I'd like to be able to version Hydro by project. So npm has this problem, Flutter has this problem. Basically, every programming language that has a package manager has this problem where everything is global. So you have like one global installation of Flutter, you have one global installation of npm, you have one global installation of blah blah blah. So trying to spin up a Flutter project that uses like Flutter 1 on a machine that has Flutter 2.10 installed is an exercise in frustration. And there's quite a lot of there's members of the community that try to make this better, like FVM. Likewise, in the npm ecosystem, there's NVM, right? So there are community solutions to this, but in general, I find that versioning experience is really painful. So I tried to just not have that problem for Hydro, where you just use npm. What version do you have installed? Okay, great. Let's install it within your project. So it's not global. Nothing is global. Everything is for your project for the version that you've declared that you're using.
Got it. Okay, now I got it. I mean, it kind of reminds me of when like you install or update your version of Flutter, where you say Flutter Docker and it like pulls all this SDK stuff. I'm guessing it's probably because it's per platform, etc. Right? That's what I'm pretty sure what's going on.
I was inspired by a similar system in Flutter. Yeah, because per platform, per target. So if you're working on a Flutter project that has never before flipped on Windows support, the first time you do that, you'll see the Flutter tool installing a whole bunch of stuff to make Windows work, right, for your machine, right? So it's Windows, so you're on Windows, it'll figure out all the Windows stuff for your machine. Likewise, if you've never turned on web, it'll figure that out for you. So I was inspired by that idea.
All right, I got that part. I think there's a tool called Detective that manages to use maybe something could be similar to you, how you activate it, because like it's somehow you point it to, you say I want to install it, and then it'll grab like the latest version at the time. But I don't know how useful that is. I'm just thinking about the distribution model. If you can keep it more into Dart, if that's the way you want to go, the way that one gets installed, I think could be something you could take a look at if you want to stick with the Dart ecosystem.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure where to go with that. Like I've spent quite a lot of time and quite a lot of energy trying to make this remove as much pain as possible in the distribution of that like first time setup experience for Hydro. A lot of it is just kind of a nature of some of the design choices. Like having this. I really wanted to separate the offline development experience, so the compilation experience and build experience, from the runtime experience. And I wanted to make it as performant as possible. You start as quickly as possible. So that's led me to, I use quite a lot of Dart. Like most of those SDK tools you pull down are written in Dart. So, they're native executables. I want to keep the dependencies basically zero. So, Dart's amazing for that. You get a little statically linked executable. So there's no other dependencies. I really want the only dependency to be npm. Obviously, that's not the case today because you also need a full Flutter installation to run your app that embeds your Hydro content. But yeah, in terms of that setup experience, I'd like it to be as small and self-contained as possible, so that all comes through npm.
All right. So, and also the way you have to run it is you have to run two different commands, right? You have to start up your Dart, you start Flutter first, and then start up there's a Hydrox command, right? Hydrox
Yep.
something, I forgot.
Run.
Okay. Hydrox run. Okay. Sorry. I was making it more complicated than what it was. Yeah. I was just taking a look at it when I was outside and also a few days ago about how everything kind of works.
In your defense, I think there's a tutorial that describes like a gigantic command line where you build and then there's like 5 switches. Like I try to expose as much of the like internals as I can. But in the general case, if you don't need like the 5 command line switches to build, you can just run, hydroc run, and the defaults are pretty sane, and it figures out, what you're trying to do, and it'll start running.
All right. So what wasn't super clear for me is how do they connect necessarily? Because I don't see. There's got to be something I have to add to both. Okay, Hydro SDK to also to in PubSpec, right? So there's two different ones. There's Hydro SDK from your side and Hydro SDK over here. Okay, and then match up the tags. npm install to get that going, and also flutter pub get. You need to make a folder called OTA.
Yes.
Is that right? And then you add another file within there in TypeScript. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the convention I'm trying to push is that your lib is obviously where pub pub requires your Dart code to live. So beside that, if you have this OTA folder, that's where Hydro would like your TypeScript to live. So you put all your TypeScript into OTA. You would run hydroc run, and it will start up that development experience. To your point about having 2 terminals and 2 things running, right now there's no integration further than that in terms of the development experience. So you have to start your Flutter app. You have to import Hydro SDK, the Dart side of it. So you have to add it to your PubSpec. You have to import it where you'd like to use it. And there's a run component widget in there. So you would describe where you'd like to put your Hydro content, where you want your TypeScript to appear in your app. So you would say run component, and you describe how it's structured. So you'd have your project name and your component name. And then at runtime in your Flutter app, there's a whole whack of Dart code that is pulled in by run component. So to your kind of question there about how does it integrate together. So because everything eventually compiles down into Lua bytecode, in your Dart app, or in your Flutter app rather, there is a Lua interpreter written in Dart. So at runtime, the Dart code that is compiled down and packaged, the TypeScript code that's compiled down to Lua and packaged up and shipped off to your Flutter app. There's an interpreter that will unpack that code and will execute it. Likewise, there are quite a lot of bindings for Flutter classes as well as for Dart standard library classes. So when you say, new material app, underneath like one layer of abstraction, maybe 2, there's a real material app class from Flutter. And likewise, everything extending below material app is all what you'd expect in Flutter. So the idea is that the surface area in terms of the execution of your code is very, very thin from what's in TypeScript and what's in Lua. Underneath it is the exact same classes, the exact same structure you would expect from Flutter, because it is Flutter underneath it.
Okay, so you're not actually rebuilding everything. You're actually there's actually just like a kind of like a thin glue. Okay, so there's nothing really special about that part.
It tries to be as thin as possible. If you pull down one of the showcase repositories from the GitHub organization, if you pull down like the counter app and you open it in VS Code and you command click into column, for instance, and you open up that TypeScript code for column, you'll find that there's basically nothing there, right? There's like one or two, there's like one line in the constructor, and there's like one line for every method. There's no definitions there. There's no meat to that. And that's because I am not implementing everything, right? When you say new column, you get a column from Flutter. That's it. It's as thin as possible. It's just glue to bring that Flutter experience into TypeScript, and then everything else is handed back to Flutter.
What's the How about the impact on performance, right? It must be a little bit, but I can imagine maybe not that much.
That's the idea is for it to be as, like I said, as thin as possible. That being said, I can't make any informed statements about performance because I haven't measured. That is on the roadmap. So I mean, at least at the time of recording, the README describes the roadmap for 2022. And one of those items is to actually measure these things, measure performance. I expect there to be an impact, both in terms of memory. There's going to be a little bit more memory use, and likewise, I expect there to be a little bit more CPU use due to the interpreter and due to how the glue bindings are implemented. But I expect it to be very minimal. I am very inspired in the design of this binding by other ecosystems. So if you consider, again, to React Native, right, you are orchestrating UI components, but ultimately all the implementation is not done in JavaScript, right? You're not calculating constraints and figuring out, Cartesian coordinates, and you're not painting pixels in JavaScript, right? It is done at a layer below you. You can consider the DOM in a web browser, right? You might say, document.create element, and you might insert it somewhere else. But how reflows are triggered, how layouts are triggered, how constraints happen, how cascades happen, how things are painted and animated, like none of that happens in JavaScript, right? There's no. I mean, I'm sure someone will jump on Twitter and tell me I'm wrong shortly, but in my mind, there's no like major UI toolkit with this kind of model where you have a ostensibly less performant language that implements everything from top to bottom. I would argue even to some degree, Flutter is the same, right? You're not putting shaders together. You're not doing anything of that nature in Dart. You still have Skia on the bottom doing those things for you. So it still bottoms out in something like C++ in my examples there.
But the other interesting thing about the C++ part is like they ended up, if I understand correctly, what I remember hearing is that they meaning like the Dart or Flutter team ended up rewriting a lot of things in Dart rather than C++ because of the marshalling back and forth between C++ and Dart was so costly that they said, okay, we can actually rewrite this in Dart, and Dart just gets compiled to native code anyways.
Yeah,
like
Dart is incredibly performant.
Dart versus Rust benchmarks. Yeah, I did Dart versus Rust benchmarks, and like I was surprised that there was sometimes that Dart somehow was actually faster than Rust, which didn't really make a lot of sense to me. But it does get compiled natively, right? So you can't say too much.
Yeah, and I mean to be fair too, though, compiling to native machine code isn't like a magic performance get out of jail free card, right? You can produce awful, machine code if you aren't careful, and the Dart compiler team has done an incredible job at ensuring that that's not the case for most users. I've been lucky enough to file a couple of bugs with the Dart compiler team, and they've always been fantastic at responding to my requests. So they do a really good job there. Were you the one who was saying,
hey, we got it all wrong about how it gets compiled to native? Was that you? Somebody did that to me recently within the last couple of months.
No, I've never complained about like an assembly level change. I've complained a couple of times about crashes. I've crashed the Dart compiler in a couple of projects in a couple of different ways, and I've filed bugs for those. What else? Oh, I've complained a few times about type flow
on Twitter. I think you were like adding me, and you're like, hey, this is because we had somebody come on the show to talk about how they managed to hack the Flutter engine to work on Nerves, which is like this tool for running Elixir and Erlang on embedded devices. And I think it was you or somebody else that was like, hey, because we were talking about how does it compile, and I think the guy said he thinks it's LLVM, and I think that somebody was saying, no, it's not LLVM. Here's the internals. Check this. Read this document. Was that you? I
remember that. Yeah, I think it might have been. I think I commented. I think that was me. Yeah. It's not LLVM.
Yeah, so I think I lost a link because my phone, like I had this weird bug with Chrome on iOS, and it lost all of my tabs because it kept crashing. And I had like over 100 tabs that I wanted to get to at some point. So that's me. I just throw up another tab every time I want to read something and never actually get to it.
I do that all the time. I've Chrome on Android. I have like 30 tabs open right now, and I never go back to read them. I found sometimes Chrome resets my tabs to 0 for a couple of days, and then I'll open Chrome, and it has my tabs again. It like forgets and then finds them again. I have no idea why that happens.
Yeah, if you could find me that link again, because I think I need to read that again. I am quite curious about how it all works because basically LLVM and GCC are the biggest ones that come to my mind, where it's like you compile it to the bytecode, and the bytecode then will get compiled to machine code after that. Most things do that. I know, of course, C and C++ probably don't do that, or maybe they do infuse GCC. Anyways, yeah, I want to get more into to figure out what's going on because it's very interesting stuff to me. Where were we going with this? Actually, do you mind to kind of talk a little bit about Lua? Because I do hear Lua use a lot of stuff, but I still don't understand what it actually is. Because I think it's used in video games too, and like I like, and then people talk about like it's a scripting language, but it's also like compilable. So what the heck is Lua exactly? Is it similar to Dart where you can script it and you can compile it?
Lua is very similar to JavaScript in its semantics. It's a highly dynamic language. I would compare Lua to like ES3. If you remember the dark days before ES6 and JavaScript, and even before ES5, Lua is a highly dynamic language. It is very simple in terms of its grammar, in terms of its rules. That dynamism makes it relatively simple. So the reference implementation, like the official Lua implementation, is about 10,000 lines of C. So it's small, it's easy to learn, it's relatively easy to read as you would like JavaScript. There are a couple of weird things it does that's different from most other languages. Like array indexing is one that always is like a never-ending meme. Like arrays in Lua start at 1 instead of 0, like the rest of the universe. So it's like a little couple of weird things, but like in general, like the semantics are like highly similar to JavaScript. It's very simple to read, simple to learn. And likewise, the implementation is very simple, like 10,000 lines of C. So it is very popular in games as a scripting engine. The simplicity comes with a nice API service. Like from an embedder standpoint, if you want to take the C implementation and use it in your game, like doing that is relatively easy. So it's found a foothold in gaming. Roblox fairly famously has their own implementation of Lua where they've added to the language. It's called Luau, I think. I think they open sourced that recently. So it's fairly popular in gaming. I used it. I'm familiar with it from quite a few years ago. I've used it in some small game projects of my own, as well as ended up being taught for part of a course I took in university. Yeah, like I said, it's small, it's simple. So I ended up writing a Dart interpreter for the bytecode. I did not write a compiler to that bytecode. Did not do that. That's a much larger task. Tried to avoid that so far. Probably going to have to eventually for Hydro, but I'd like to not do that.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few implementations of Lua VM for Dart and Flutter, which I'm a little bit surprised about.
Yeah, I mean, basically every language has one. Dart has Flutter in general has a couple. A couple seconds on Google, I'm sure you'll find like a Java, like a Lua in Java, Lua in C#. Like I said, it's small. It's relatively easy to implement.
That's why I still don't understand so Lua is a scripting language, but it could be still fast, right? I'm still trying to understand exactly. It seems like it's a language that's easy to implement in other languages. Is that one way to say it?
Yeah, that's definitely a good description of it. For my purposes, in particular in Hydro, I think Lua was a great choice simply because TypeScript to Lua, that compiler project, existed. If that hadn't existed, I probably would not be at this place I am with Hydro. I started thinking about Hydro in 2019. This idea of just this idea of separating Flutter from Dart and separating the deployment experience from the traditional experience you're required in Android and iOS. So I went through quite a few different iterations. I knew that I would have to build a layer on top of Flutter in terms of deployment experience. I knew that would come with a different development experience as well, and I wasn't sure what that would look like. So I went through quite a few iterations on Hydro, but the idea has been the same. So I made a Lisp interpreter. I had a Lisp interpreter I wrote in Dart based off a couple of community examples. I had a JavaScript implementation of Hydro, like a pure JavaScript implementation for some time. I had a JavaScript interpreter. I was using duct tape at the time. I was embedding that into a Flutter app. I couldn't figure out how to make the duct tape GC and the Dart GC work together, and I was like leaking memory like on every single allocation. It was like a big rat's nest, and I ended up giving up on that. I tried for some time with Hummingbird. At the time, Flutter Web was in like early preview, and it was called Hummingbird. So I tried a few approaches trying to bridge the gap between Hummingbird and Flutter Web, and then Flutter native, so to speak. That didn't really go anywhere. Eventually, I discovered TypeScript to Lua existed, so that kind of solved the development experience for me. If you can get from TypeScript to Lua, then what's stopping you from getting from Lua or getting Lua into your running app? And what was stopping me at the time was not having a Lua interpreter. So that was the missing piece, and then that's kind of just been onward ever since. But that being said, like there's nothing stopping Hydro from evolving into the future to include other implementations. So just because TypeScript to Lua exists doesn't mean that that is the only pathway for this entire development experience of using Flutter from other languages. I am cautiously eyeing the developments in WebAssembly, particularly WASM GC. Like I am not opposed to spending a year or two writing a little WASM interpreter in Dart to provide the same experience. There's a couple other research projects I've seen in the community that have done like little tiny .NET interpreters in different languages and likewise little JVMs. Like at the end of the day, it's all the same idea. You have this little tiny glue binding exposing some, in this case, Dart APIs, and how that glue is evaluated or how that glue is implemented is the differences aren't very important, and how that happens isn't very important as long as it has a similar footprint. So into the future, implementation other than Lua, it's definitely something on my radar, but I'm trying not to work on those because they're huge. They're large commitments.
Yeah, it seems like it. But it seems like there's actually some way that you can write Dart to Lua too. I've seen called.
I believe it.
This one, Lua Dardo. Lua Dardo. Have you heard this one?
Yeah, my understanding of that, I might be wrong, so I haven't looked at it in a while, but my understanding was that is also a Lua implementation in Dart. So they have a Lua compiler and a Lua interpreter all written in Dart. In terms of compiling Dart into something else, there's someone in the community building a project called Dart Eval. So they are writing a compiler and also an interpreter for Dart in Dart. I think it's a great project. I've collaborated with him a little bit in terms of bindings, like how might you call list.map from your interpreter and get the real the real list.map from Dart core. How might that work? What does that bridging look like? We've collaborated a little bit on that, but writing a Dart compiler is something I'm trying really hard to not do because the language is very complicated.
All right, so basically you're shipping up the Lua files. I mean, and then you can download this Lua bytecode, and Lua is gonna talk to Dart, pull up the right pieces. Yep. I mean, that seems pretty straightforward at the high level. I'm sure there's a lot of intricacies in all those different layers. Now, isn't that dangerous to do? To pull in code from the outside? I think that's like why like a lot of places like iOS is considering, like Apple's saying. Code push is okay, but if you're going to bring a new functionality, you have to really go to the App Store. Fixing a bug is okay, but they may close that part off, right? So do you feel like this could be something that maybe is wasted effort?
It could be, absolutely could be. There's nothing stopping any of the distribution, either kind of the gatekeepers of distribution for mobile, whether that be the App Store or Google Play Store. There's nothing stopping these organizations from just saying, no, this is banned. That's definitely possible. And, if that's the case, then was it wasted effort on my part? I guess it could be. But that being said, like I said, the idea of Hydro is about lowering barrier to entry. The principle is still the same. And likewise, the implementation on the language side is still, it's the same very, very high level idea. How that happens is kind of just details at that point. So should code push no longer be viable, that's fine, because I still feel like I bring value in terms of bringing Flutter into other languages and solving that human problem of language background and language familiarity.
Okay, but what about this part? If they start trying to say, okay, how do I do this in Flutter? Then they're going to get a lot of stuff written in Dart. How about that issue where everything is kind of out there written in Dart because that's the actual way to do it? This is also a little bit of a problem, right?
I think that'd be fantastic. I think that'd be great. Like if there's no appetite for what I'm doing, I think that's a great world we live in where Dart is more popular and is used in more spaces than it is now. I think that'd be great. I think, Hydro being obsoleted by Dart's popularity is a win. I think that's great. I don't think that will ever happen for human reasons, again, like I've been talking about, but in your description, I think that I would welcome that. I just don't think it'll happen.
But that's okay. Let me put it this way. When Null Safety came out, a lot of newcomers were really upset, and also some people who were just in it were also upset because everything before that was written with null unsafe or whatever you call it, with the OG version of Dart, right? So
Yep.
all these tutorials basically became obsolete unless you knew what was going on and you could understand. Like, you're going to have this issue where people, okay, so you're going to get people to come on, but they're going to say, well, how can I do this? And they're going to find the answer in Dart. Now, what are you expecting them to do? Are you expecting them to somehow in their mind translate this stuff to TypeScript? Or are you hoping that they would use this as a way to say, okay, maybe I should stop working with Hydro and get into Flutter?
That's a good question. So documentation, particularly tutorials and past answers and stuff, that's something that I've thought about in the context of Hydro, but I haven't quite gotten there yet. So there's something I'm trying not to talk about just because it's a gigantic rabbit hole and it's a huge rabbit hole, but this bridging experience extends, like this bridging experience from Flutter, Dart into TypeScript. This bridging experience is a huge rabbit hole. So part of that experience is documentation. And it's something I've thought about, but not something I've actioned yet because, to your point, like it's important. Otherwise, newcomers will have a dissonance where they're reading examples in Dart and then trying to translate that. That's not a good experience. So that is on my radar, but it is not on the 2022 roadmap. I say roadmap. I'm not promising anything because I work on this in my free time, but the roadmap is stuff I've thought about to the degree where I'm willing to start to action it. But documentation I've thought about, but I haven't quite gotten there.
So how stable, or I want to say the word useful, but useful doesn't really make sense in this case. I just want to know, is this thing ready for us to use in production, or is it just simply still kind of like a project? Okay, so it's still up and coming.
There are a lot of the limitations are well documented and well known, especially around hot reload. There's quite a few edge cases. A lot of it is due to TypeScript, the language, as well as how it's lowered, the representation of Lua it's lowered into. That's quite a lot of that can be cleaned up from a compiler standpoint rather than a runtime standpoint for hot reload. In terms of performance, that's a big unknown. I would encourage nobody to use something in production where you don't have a clear understanding of the performance constraints, in particular the performance envelope that solution produces for you. So that's an unknown. And then just simply in terms of the availability, right? If you're going to sit down and you're going to write a Flutter experience, you expect to be able to say, okay, I'm done with widgets now. I would like to go deeper. I have this constraint. I have these requirements that require me to start to write render objects or start to, blah, blah, blah. Hydro doesn't expose any of that to you today. What you see in the few example applications and the showcase repositories, anything outside of those, you basically can't do. Because what is available to you to use from TypeScript, from Flutter, is very limited. However, as I alluded to, if you poke through the branches that are in progress on GitHub, you'll see these things are coming. They've been a long time coming, and they will be available. But I'm not putting any promises about timelines or anything to that effect. But these things are coming.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty cool, and it's good that you let people know, hey, this is not ready for production yet. So I think this would be. So if I were to say what the current state of Hydro SDK is, it's in the state where you can play and you can get people interested in Flutter, but not where they can say, okay, I'm going to release my app to the App Store. It's just like,
exactly.
No, this is just kind of like what do you call that? A bridge or training wheels or something like that?
It's a very, very strong proof of concept. I think it's a
Okay.
minimum lovable product, if I could say that. So, the development experience that you like from Flutter, the easy setup through npm, hot reload, familiar APIs, like all of that is there. It looks nice, it feels nice, and then you try to push the gas a little bit too much, and then it just kind of stops working, right? So, it works and it looks nice and
Okay.
it feels nice, but it's not quite there, not quite ready for prime time. But again, as I've alluded to, like, there's branches in progress that are almost 300 commits ahead of the default. Like, there's a lot of work going on that's not quite in the spotlight to solve these things and to bring that experience all the way. I try to be very, very public on GitHub. I'm not to say that I'm advertising it, but if you poke through the GitHub issues, you poke through some of the scoping issues and projects that are organized on GitHub, I try to be very open in how I'm kind of performing project management in terms of future work as well as current work. So, I'd like to think it's all there. If you poke through GitHub, I'm trying to be as transparent as I can with future plans and current progress. So it's all kind of coming together, but it's not quite there.
Yeah, it seems pretty exciting. Not sure if it's for me. I really love Dart compared to TypeScript, but I do like the ideas, and I think it's could open up ways for other things. I'm not too sure what else it could be, but it's better to experiment and see what happens than to lay still. So it's interesting. Yeah, is there anything you wanted to say before we start to sign off?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, kind of try to echo, it's not ready for production yet, but the plans are large and the progress is large, as I alluded to. So, in the future, I'd like to see a future where any Dart package, including the Dart Center library, which is a Dart package, it's different than a regular Dart package, but it is a Dart package, including Flutter, which is a regular Dart package, and including anything that you might be interested in from pub.dev. I'd like to see all of that available in Hydro SDK, and the infrastructure to make that happen is happening. In terms of the supported languages, TypeScript has been a really good way to try out these ideas. It all kind of has come together in terms of the tooling and in terms of the available third-party packages to get me there. I've been working with some individuals from the .NET community, as well as some individuals from the Hakes community. Hakes is, I know it's probably a bit more obscure language, it's very popular for video games. There's a couple of other ecosystems I'd like to see Hydro expand into, in addition to TypeScript, in addition to looking at web developers. So again, .NET and Hakes are the two I'm looking at next. So the plans are large, the progress is large. If you look at the GitHub branches, it's just not quite there yet. So I'd like to see it. I think it'll evolve a lot in the next this calendar year, as well as a couple of years to come. I think there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, I'll try to keep watching to see what's going on, and also feel free to ping me, maybe come back. And if you have a demo, I think I would like to see that too. Maybe whenever you feel you're ready, just go ahead and make another schedule. I think it would be cool to see how it works. Because this kind of stuff, I mean, we can get an idea by you describing it, but if we could see it, then I think that would give a lot more understanding. I mean, what's cool is that you do on your website, you do have like that GIF or GIF that kind of shows the experience. But yeah, you just need to kind of see what's going on and actually kind of walk through it and say, this is what's going on. This is compiling. This is going to go over as Lua bytecode. Now it's running. Because when you do your stuff right, you save it, and I'm not sure if it runs command or you do something else, but it is kicking up something over, and it takes quite a bit longer than traditional hot code reload within Dart. But that's because there's a lot of stuff happening, right?
Yeah, there's the performance of that I'm not at all happy with. That's something that is to be done.
Very cool. I'm pretty excited to check this out. I hope you can come back and kind of show off what it's doing, because it could be, I mean, I could imagine bringing on some people who only know TypeScript and maybe don't want to use Dart or are not interested in learning a new language, because like you said, that can be a hindrance. That is one of the things that people talk about when they compare React Native and Flutter. It's like, okay, I have to learn another language. Well, yes, but language is not complicated. Like you said, it's pretty straightforward. But people just say, no, it's another new language.
Absolutely, yeah. Big, like I said, I'm looking to solve human problems, not technical ones. So looking to expand Flutter's reach into other ecosystems, people from other backgrounds. Big plan, big progress. That's more or less the pitch.
I've been watching this guy on YouTube who kind of talks about like inventions for the home, like in the cooking area, I think his name is Famosa, Dan Famosa or something like that. His he described one device that's quite funny. It's like it was pretty bad when he tried to use it, and he said basically there was no problem before, but then with this device now he actually created a new problem. This kind of remind me of that, where it's like everything kind of works very well with Flutter, and then like you're creating more issues to work on when you're doing this, but at the same time you're solving another issue. So sorry, this kind of rang into my head about that. That you have more problems now.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very human experience too. Like as you raise the bar, people, whether they do it on purpose or not, will take that for granted, and they will forget how terrible it was before you raise the bar, and they will just ask for more and more and more. So consider even our discussion at the start of this recording. You were talking about hot reload for shelf application, for building server side applications, right? Before Flutter came along and had this gorgeous hot reload experience, you might have never thought to ask for that, right? Before Flutter, I mean, if you did small talk, I'm sorry. I know I'm kind of like, I'm not mentioning like a couple of decades of history here, but in the time between small talk and Flutter, I feel that there's not been a fantastic, beautiful hot reload experience. So they've kind of raised the bar to a high degree. You see other ecosystems like, I can't quite say for certain if they are reacting to Flutter here, but there's been a lot of fanfare around .NET hot reload now. I see all of a sudden, so I feel like to a high degree, Flutter has raised that bar where now if you don't have hot reload, hot reload is table stakes. And I believe that is due to Flutter delivering on that experience. So, .NET, from what I can tell, now that's a requirement or an ask. And likewise, yourself, why don't we have this for server-side applications? You raise the bar and then people want more, and that just goes forever. And I think that's a beautiful problem to have.
Yeah, I mean, hot code reload, like I've had the experience for nearly most of my development career where I started with Ruby with Rails, and Rails, as you're developing a Rails app, it does have this. It seems like hot code reload, but it's not, just reinterpreting the files, I think, or something like that. Then I switched over to Elixir, and that does actually have hot code reload, and that's built into the language, built into the ecosystem, the way the VM works. And then Dart's got the same thing. So when I wanted to use Dart, well, Flutter actually, and then when I went to use Dart, I was like, why is it not working out of the box? And then, but the same thing with actually Elixir is you actually have to have a hot code reloader that actually does look at the file system and does like kick the process off. Oh, these files have changed, so let me recompile them and then kick them over to the VM and then update it. But at least I know about that. If I need to bring something in, which what it seems like, then okay, I would like that to be documented. So at least I know, right? Why is it not working? But I feel like I haven't looked very deeply on Dart website, but I don't think it's well documented. Maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, again, like you said, maybe the majority of the apps are CLI. The people that really don't care about this because it's fast to compile. Anyways, we're going off topic again. I really appreciate your time. It's early in the morning for you. It's good if we don't drain up all your time in the morning for you to get stuff done. So
it's not early anymore. It's a regular time of the morning now.
Yeah, it's about 8 a.m. for you.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on. Definitely, I think if we can get a demo going, it'd be awesome for people to take a look at and see if it's interesting to them. Maybe it's a way for them to bring Flutter into their company or team or whatever.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I don't know how long you've been doing this. A long-time listener of Flying High with Flutter. It's really neat to be on it now. So thank you for having me. Hopefully by the next time you'll have me again, I'll have solved some more human problems, made some more progress. I'm gonna give a demo.
Yeah, definitely. Just hit me up, and I'm interested to see it, to show everybody what Hydro SDK is, and see if it's for them.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again for coming on.